everything's fermented. So if you think about what is fermented foods, so sourdough is fermented, cheese is fermented, yogurt is fermented, pickles are fermented, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, fish sauce, everything has been fermented or is fermented in some sort of way. So, I travel a lot across my career. I worked in a liquor business, for example, alcohol is fermented. I worked in a chocolate business, chocolate is fermented. So I've always enjoyed the food that takes time to develop the flavors. Because all of those, aged cheese, sauerkraut takes 3 weeks to develop the flavors, kimchi 5 to 10 days. So I had a big appreciation for food that takes time to develop the flavor, and that's how I got into it.
Welcome to the Let's Chew podcast presented by Gulfood, the largest annual F&B sourcing event in the world. I'm your host, Juwaria Hirsi, bringing you compelling stories and insights to a wide range of topics in the food and drinks industry. From farming, behind the scenes, to the culinary world, and to foods we simply love to chew on. In this podcast series, we speak to people, brands, and businesses across the food and drinks spectrum to find out more about why they do what they do and how, in their own way, they're championing change and shifting the future of food and drink. Trust me, there's so much more, so listen to the Let's Chew podcast on our website, gulfood.com, and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates in food. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Let's Chew podcast. As always, I'm your host, Juwaria Hirsi. And on today's episode, we have a guest who is a true fermenting fanatic. Joining us is Maher El Tabchy, the founder of Tabchilli, a pioneering producer of fermented foods in the UAE. Thank you so much for joining us, Maher.
Hey, thank you very much. Great on pronouncing Tabchilli. So I'm Maher. So I've been in the business of fermentation for probably 2 years, but I've been fermenting for longer than that. And my passion really evolved from a COVID baby to a full store of fermented food and bacteria, which I like to share about and talk about always.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and what drew you to the entire fermentation world.
So from a background perspective, I grew up in Lebanon. I've always had a kind of a Mediterranean diet where we eat fresh vegetables and seasonal fruits, but there's also preservation and fermented foods. As you know, many countries across the world have some kind of food which is preserved. And fermentation after drying is one of the most commonly used way to preserve foods. So I had that from my background in terms of flavors I used to consume, because these are flavors in fermentation you cannot make with fire. Only bacteria can cultivate them. So I had a really, I had really a strong sense of belonging and enjoying those kind of foods. And then I used to travel a lot for my work when I relocated to Dubai 7 years ago. But I realized that fermented food is not readily available across the UAE market as a landscape. And the second thing, and actually the first most important thing that drew me to fermentation and fermented food is actually gut health. Probiotics. Fermented foods has an abundance of good gut health bacteria that are beneficial for us. And I found out that it's not available there. So it was my mission to really open a space to bring education on fermented food and hopefully one day get that across every single household. And hopefully I'm on a journey for the past 2 years.
And what type of fermented products do you say that's your style and that you work with, that it's maybe you gain from your experiences or different cultures, like you mentioned, that you work with?
So like fermented foods everything's fermented. So if you think about what is fermented foods, so sourdough is fermented, cheese is fermented, yogurt is fermented, pickles are fermented, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, fish sauce, everything has been fermented or is fermented in some sort of way. So, I travel a lot across my career. I worked in a liquor business, for example, alcohol is fermented. I worked in a chocolate business, chocolate is fermented. So I've always enjoyed the food that takes time to develop the flavors. Because all of those, aged cheese, sauerkraut takes 3 weeks to develop the flavors, kimchi 5 to 10 days. So I had a big appreciation for food that takes time to develop the flavor, and that's how I got into it.
Okay. And obviously, the practical sides of things like gut health, probiotics, and all the benefits of making or fermenting foods, what would you say are some of the challenges or the rewards that you get from fermenting foods?
So just like when I first opened my space here in Dubai in Al Wasl, it was not just a space where I'm producing fermented food. Tabchilli is a sensorial, experiential space where consumers or chefs alike can come and learn and see for themselves the different types of fermentation. So when it comes to fermentation, there are two angles for it. One is reducing food waste, because you're taking food that's going to waste and you're repurposing it or extending shelf life. But by doing that as well, you're getting flavor and health benefits. So in my shop and in my space, I teach people how to ferment vegetables, ferment drinks like kombucha or vinegars, or do their own fermenting grains, their milk kefir. But for me, if you think about challenges, it's time. People don't usually have the time to ferment because it takes a bit, maybe kombucha 10 days, sauerkraut can take 7 to 3 weeks. So all of those challenges I saw from most consumers who come is time. And second one is, for me as a fermentation producer, was compliance and regulatory. Because you're working with bacteria, and bacteria, many people think, oh, they're not safe to eat, right? Yeah. But how can you make sure that the quality is consistent? So for me, I had a big learning curve of getting the right regulatory approvals to make sure my products not only comply with the local regulation, but are HACCP certified. So in a nutshell, to reply to your question, as a fermentation food producer, for me, my biggest barrier was the quality length to get that approved in Dubai. And second, how to get people hooked on fermentation and see time as just a small hiccup to get beautiful flavors and health benefits.
Okay, beautiful. Just to go back to the safety side, what are the challenges? Like, can you ferment something too long?
So I say, people ask me how long. So just recap. So usually, what is fermentation? What is pickling? Okay, because people come to my store, say, Maher, are you pickling? Like, dude, no, I'm fermenting, and I think it's nicer as a word, but what's the catch? So to pickle or using vinegar, okay, you are using water. You put, for example, your cucumbers, and you put vinegar on top, right? In 2-3 days, you get this tangy, beautiful, crunchy texture from any pickle. But what does vinegar do? If you think of vinegar, vinegar is sterile. So vinegar, you use vinegar and water to clean your table. So it kills the bacteria, it kills the probiotics. Okay. So when we are fermenting, we are using naturally occurring bacteria. So we use salt. And salt inhibits the growth of bad bacteria and also promotes the bacterial growth. But how do we know usually that something is safe to eat in a fermentation world? The pH, or the indication of potential acidity, should be below 4. And that's something we do to produce fermented food. That's how we control quality and consistency and safety. Okay. But there are different technical ways of looking at it. But if you start fermenting vegetables, it could not go wrong if you're looking at specific parameters to control. One is temperature, not too hot and not too cold. Second, all your veggies have to be submerged under the brine or the water with the salt. And make sure your visual cues are always there.
And how can I do all that at home for our listeners?
So for the listeners, I guess the first thing that you can do, and very easy, so fermenting vegetables is one of the easiest way to start because it's kind of straightforward. Just have to trust the process. So for example, first of all, you need a sterilized jar, okay, to put your vessel in. And then let's say if you want to make sauerkraut, which is one of the easiest ferment, you take a cabbage, okay, so one cabbage, you clean it, you rinse it, and then you shred it. So you have a nice shredded cabbage salad. Okay. Next thing you do, you just put 2% salt. So if it's 1 kg, 2%, 20 grams of salt on it, massage it quite well, get it quite sweaty, put it in a jar, pack it, close it, leave it for 3 weeks. Very easy, but then you see it changing color and texture. This is where people get, what's happening. But once you do it once, it becomes more frequent. And we call it the art of fermentation. And many people, it's not like I'm pioneering it because it's so individual. Because every time it changes depending on temperature, on the bacteria, on this. So I always say the best kombucha is the one you make. The best kimchi is not the one I sell, it's the one you make. Because it's always up to your flavors, up to your expectations.
Okay. And like you said, it depends on each fermentation or product that you're making. Yeah. But how can someone go wrong?
So how can you go wrong? So usually fermentation goes wrong when you have bad bugs coming in and spoiling it. Okay. The bad bugs usually are, for example, mold. Okay, mold, you don't see it and then you see it. So every ferment has a threshold, but usually it's not having the safety requirement, having the right amount of salt. Salt is like a bouncer. It prevents bad bugs of coming in. Usually everything has to be submerged, not exposed to oxygen, okay, in specific ferments. This allows you to control the parameters.
Okay, and is it good to leave it in the fridge or keep it outside, room temperature, or what is usually...
So how it happens. So usually when you are fermenting, so you rely on temperature to help the bacteria really create those flavors and change that texture. And to think about it, fermentation is actually controlled rot because you're allowing food to change texture over time, but you're controlling the process. Okay? But thing is, why you use a fridge? The fridge, the temperature is so low that the fermentation goes kind of a standstill. So you only use a fridge to lock the flavor you like. So for example, so if you're going to make kimchi, I give you a recipe, I tell you it's 5 days. But when you try it 5 days, you're like, you know what, dude? It's not tangy enough. You leave it to ferment 2-3 more days to get more flavor. Once you like it, you put it in the fridge. Because the fridge slows down the fermentation process, the bacteria go in sleeping mode, and directly it locks that flavor for you so you can enjoy it longer.
Okay. And aside from all the benefits like gut health, zero waste, have you seen any maybe surprising trends or advantages through your work?
So one of the things that really keeps me going for Tabchilli, because fermented food is one of the most complicated food category and scene in Dubai. Why? It takes time to make it. Municipality and approvals is tough. It's such a small market that everybody, we have a sweet tooth here in Dubai and the UAE. So it's not a big market. So for me, the challenge was how can people adopt fermented food as a daily way for it? Because fermented food, as I mentioned, it's cheese, it's bread, it's different kind of things that we can have. But for me, the most rewarding thing that kept me going, and as to your question, I noticed people are buying my product and coming to my store for health benefits before flavor.
Okay.
So for me, it shows that many people are asking for food that's unprocessed. That's only 2-3 ingredients, not like a list of where you need a PhD in math and chemicals just to understand those words.
Yeah.
This was kind of like the striking thing that I saw that made me really spearhead more innovation, more flavors, get feedback from them, because it's a community that's actually growing in terms of health consciousness.
So health first, and then comes the flavor. Usual people who come to your store.
Yeah, a flavor is, of course, they would not, so if it's not flavorful, they will not
good,
buy.
You won't come back.
But if you want, like the calling is, oh, finally we have fermented food. It means unpasteurized, raw, full of probiotics, good for my gut. It's not like the stuff that's pasteurized or full of chemicals in the local market.
Okay, beautiful. And what would you say are the trending fermented products that you see coming up maybe from this year and like the next 5 years?
So like, because we live in Dubai and it's lots of fusion, so kimchi is one that's always people are enjoying. So many people don't know what is kimchi, but many people love kimchi. It's like a love and hate relationship. But because we have influence of different modern cuisine, I see kimchi coming up, more adoption. Sauerkraut is coming in. Why? Because sauerkraut is very prevalent, which is fermented cabbage, in Eastern Europe and that part of side. And since we had a big influx for the past 2 years of Eastern Europeans, we see that coming up as trends, especially with the opening of stores which reflect that kind of food scene over there. You have miso, which is fermented soybeans and others. Many chefs in their cuisines are using that as well. And the other rise, which I'm very happy to see coming in, is kombucha and fermented drinks. Because most of the restaurants are not licensed. They don't sell alcohol. So to drive a better experience, they're no longer using mocktails or juices. They are going to fermenting drinks, which have a nice sourness flavor to them. And kombucha and other fermented drinks, they can play with a nice variety of menus to add that kind of word there.
Okay. And on a personal note, what is your favorite fermented food or product and why?
So my chili, which I call Tabchilli. So I love peppers. I love heat. And I lived in Africa, I lived in Latin America, I lived in India. I tried every single chili everywhere, and I love spicy cuisine. But I started with one product, which was my fermented chili, which takes 3 months to make. Because back home in Lebanon, thing is that even in your country, I'm sure, every area is known for a specific cuisine, right? Something that they're specialized in. And if you go there, you have to bring that specific cheese or this. And it's all fermented. It's all traditional preservation methods of this, which creates the flavors which you go and reach for. So I used to do that back home when I was young, 20 years ago. Not that old, but that's one of my favorite products because this allowed me to give the confidence, you know what? I can make a good fermented chili, but it's not me making it, it's the bacteria. Understanding how the bacteria can drive that flavor allowed me to step into different worlds of fermented food and such a big rabbit hole that is so much things to do, but it gave me the confidence to say, when I had my full-time job, I'm going to go ahead and start giving people what they want and learning through the process. So for me, my fermented chili is my own preference. Just a reminder that the world of fermentation is huge and it's to be shared with everybody else.
Beautiful. I want to hear more about this chili that you mentioned. It came back from your home country or where you stayed. So what do you think is like unique about that particular chili that drived your whole? It's named after your whole store. It's Tabchilli.
Yeah. So my name is Tabchilli, and so if my wife will hear this podcast, I'm sure she will. She remembers because I used to ferment and do so many stuff in her kitchen 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So how it started is that you understand that if you put vinegar in a chili, fermented hot sauce, you kill the probiotics. So it's no longer raw and alive. So my process takes 3 months to make. So I ferment for 3 months my chilies. And then what I do, so I use salt coming from my home country. I use a specific salt. It's called salt de sel. But it's a very coarse, flaky salt, which is good for fermenting, has a nice saltiness. And when I'm done with the fermenting, I extract the liquid and I infuse extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil gives it a velvety texture, but also olive oil keeps the ferment anaerobic. So it means that the bacteria are still fermenting. So my chili, if you buy it or I gift it or you try it, every single day or month is going to still be alive and still changing in flavor.
Oh.
So that was kind of for me to tame a chili that's going to be consistently in your cupboard without exploding.
Okay.
Was kind of like a milestone for me.
But does it get sweeter or does it stay chili?
The spiciness is always there. Olive oil breaks it down, makes it more mellow. But if you want, and anything was fermented, as long as it's fermenting, flavors develop. We call this a stationary phase.
Okay.
For example, if you're fermenting cheese, it might take 1 week to ferment, but why are we aging it for 3 years? To create the conditions for flavor. Same thing with wine, for example, or kombucha or vinegars. So you're allowing time to play with it. Because I cannot give you a product that's going to take 1 year, okay, it's not relevant and I want to consume it, I found the sweet spot of 3 months and then allowing you to enjoy it throughout.
However you like. Beautiful. And could you let our listeners know how they can maybe take part in your workshops, where they can find Tabchilli?
Yeah, I would love to. So I'm based in Dubai. I have a physical store in Al Wasl Mall. And basically we offer workshops twice a week. If I have 1 customer or 5 or 10, I'm always there. And they can learn about how to ferment vegetables, for making their kimchi, their sauerkraut and hot sauce. And I have a very bad business model because I give my recipes. But I know that it's going to be different because my bacteria are different than yours.
Yeah.
Teach about fermented drinks, how to make their vinegars, how to make their kombucha, or to make their water kefir, which are probiotic drinks. And also how to make their koji, their miso, soy shoyu, and also grains and cheeses. But for me, it's about how you can take waste to taste. So your excess food to really transform to something beautiful and make sure that if you make something, it's safe for you to consume and for all your friends and family to enjoy the health benefits.
Beautiful. And finally, as you are a speaker in our upcoming Gulfood Green show, what are you mostly excited for and what can our attendees look forward to hearing from you?
So I'm very excited to be with the panel that's already formed for the Gulfood Green show because I think the future is about how to drive sustainability, reducing food waste, and impacting better our health and wellness and the planet. And these are topics that also fermentation plays a role in because fermented food not only provides flavor, yes, but provides health benefits. It can be used to tackle food security. As you know, many places across the world, we don't have access to fridges. So how can you use that fermentation to drive food security, if not in UAE at scale? So there is lots of topics where we can really touch base on and talk about and brainstorm about how to drive adoption for it, how to drive scale for it, how to make sure we reduce food waste. And as you know, one of the biggest issues across not this country, but diabetes is becoming a pandemic. Overly processed food, sugars. So fermented foods and fermentation can tackle many different aspects if we drive adoption to it. So expect me to talk about this topics, and definitely excited to be part of this exciting panel of experts who are leading sustainability initiatives in Gulfood Green.
We're really excited to have you on the Food for Future Summit at Gulfood Green. And thank you so much for joining us at the Let's Chew podcast.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here and looking forward.
Thank you so much.